I tell you what,
it's not like the olden days.
I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast on the mysterious cities of gold. First, I'll tell you what the mysterious cities of gold is. It's a cartoon co-produced by a Japanese company and a French company in the early 80s. It originally aired in French and Japanese, presumably, from 1982 to 83. It has 39 episodes and therefore is quite long. Not long after that, it was dubbed into English by Canadians to try and appeal both to the US market and the UK market, so we could both understand the accents and like the sound of them well enough.
We like Canadian accents better than US accents, don't we?
Because they're softer, and of course the Americans are happy enough with it as a North American accent, so we were both happy with it. And it first aired on television on CBBC in the UK quite soon after it was originally in French, but I first discovered it on its repeat viewing. I didn't used to remember exactly how old I was, but it turned out its repeat viewing was in the summer of 1989, so I must have been 6, which sounds about right. And then almost 20 years later I watched the whole thing on YouTube and absolutely loved it, and started getting DVDs of it. First the pirate one that was being widely distributed, and then the proper one when it came out. And Rosie's first exposure, really, I mean, she probably saw little bits of it when she was just 4, but can't really remember. Her first exposure to it, really, was when she watched the pirate DVD to give it a go, and I don't think she was that impressed with it at the time.
At the time, no, I wasn't. I watched the first, how many episodes was
I think it was 8.
I got up to the one where they meet Tao.
So possibly you only got up to like 5 or 6.
And then I gave it back to you and said I don't want to watch anymore, it's boring. But then the next time I actually got into it, that was when you had the official DVD, and I decided I'd give it another go.
And I was very glad that you liked it that time. And then we watched it again quite recently, so I should be able to talk about it with quite a lot of good memory. I've made a note to talk about the basic premise, but like with many shows like Nightmare, it's hard to sum up in a couple of sentences. It's an epic adventure cartoon series about, unsurprisingly, searching for cities of gold, or a city of gold, in South and Central America in the time of the Spanish conquistadors. But it's so much more than that as well. It's also a fantasy show, or sci-fi show really, and very much a character-driven show. And you could call it an anime if you wanted to, but it isn't quite done in that style, although obviously as it's Japanese produced, or partly Japanese produced, it certainly has aspects of the anime style. Not just in the physical drawing and animating of it actually, but also in the deeper characters and themes, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I say in my little review of it that's on DeviantArt that I will link to, it's lovingly and beautifully animated in a style all its own. And it is really. It's not quite anime, it's not quite Western animation, which I think adds to the special aura that the show has had for many people over the past 30 years or so. And I think we should move on now to talk about the characters, and we will link that into themes, I'm sure, as it is a very character-driven show. Now, obviously, the characters that there's a lot to say about are Esteban, Zia, and Tao, who I'm looking at on my computer wallpaper at the moment.
Obviously.
But I thought first we might mention Mendoza, who's the main adult character, because he might be a bit quicker to talk about, and there's less sort of cross-referencing with the 3 members of the trio to do with him, I would think. Now, Mendoza is an extremely interesting adult character, as he doesn't fit into the traditional cartoon role of goody or baddie, which mainly you would see characters do very rigidly in those days. You'd sit down to watch a cartoon or any children's show, and you get the goodies and the baddies. And Cities of Gold certainly has the protagonists and the antagonists, and Mendoza is very much a protagonist, the main adult protagonist. But is he really a goodie? No. Is he really a baddie? No. What is he?
He's an ambi.
Well, he is really.
I think by the end he's gone on a bit of a journey and become a goodie, hasn't he?
Yes, very much so. Mendoza's journey is very interesting, just like the journey of the three young characters, who we'll come on to in a minute. But you can see from the beginning that Mendoza is a man of great skill on the sea and in battle, a man of great honour and courage and pride and bravery, which is courage, really. But he's also quite sneaky, quite Machiavellian, quite greedy about gold, and all these different aspects combine to make a very interesting and well-rounded character. And it's interesting to see at different points in the epic 39-episode story, of which he's in 37, how these different parts of Mendoza's character come into play and how they're sometimes at odds with each other, and which ones win out in the end. The virtuous ones, of course, win out in the end, as we'd all like to see.
His motivation throughout the series is that he wants some gold, isn't it? And he does actually, spoiler alert, get some gold. And the man who does his voice, what's his name?
Oh yes, Howard, something long beginning with R.
Howard likes to think that he did something good and noble with his gold, and Jake had the idea that he was going to open an orphanage, didn't you, Jake?
Yes, I think that's a very nice idea, that Mendoza, after he's pilfered his gold, does take back to Spain and do something nice with it, because he's been on this huge journey and become very much a better person. I did used to wonder or worry that maybe the fact that he's gone off to nick his gold at the very end might jeopardise his character journey and nullify it in some way, but it doesn't really, because he's already made the decision slightly earlier to do the noble thing, stick around, help the Indians, the Mayas, fight the real baddies, and he's done a lot to prove himself as a better and nobler and more rounded person after his journey. So, he snuck off when he's got the opportunity and got what he came for, which I suppose it would be out of character for him to completely abandon his avarice at the end.
It shows how things aren't black and white, doesn't it?
Yes, I think Mendoza must be the best example of a character who isn't black or white from any kind of children's show, possibly any show.
Apart from Merklin.
Oh, yes! Merklin from Visionaries, which is a show we're probably never going to podcast about.
No.
But, yes, it certainly is true to say that Merklin, the magician from that, is very ambiguous in his morality, which is quite nice. The other two main adult characters, Mendoza's companions, are a couple of sailors called Sancho and Pedro. And what should we say about them?
They're quite ambivalent too, aren't they? They seem, for most of the time, to be more avaricious and less interested in looking after the children than Mendoza. And I always thought Mendoza was more of a goodie than Sancho and Pedro, even if he wasn't completely a goodie. They're very keen to sort of switch to the winning side and that kind of thing when things get rough, don't they? And they're always bitching and complaining about things, and they're quite annoying. And that was definitely the impression I got of them when I didn't manage to watch most of it. When I watched it all the way through for the first time, I noticed that they were quite good at holding their own and taking things in their stride and even looking after the children a little bit when they're at sea, which fits in with them being sailors, doesn't it?
They're grizzled old sea salts, really, and they're not really at home tramping about South America and flying around in a solar-powered aeroplane. But I did used to think of Sancho and Pedro as rather inglorious aspects of the show, and I used to say, well, they never really come out of the realms of unfunny comic relief and they don't really add anything. But you're quite right in what you say there. There is more to them than you might notice the first couple of times. And they do have their part to play in the show. Sometimes only to provide the immoral aspects that the children, or sometimes Mendoza, will be fighting against and providing a contrast to the better, nobler characters. But sometimes they will come into their own and prove themselves to have better qualities. So they certainly are protagonists as well.
I think in the end they come through and help with the big climactic save the day sort of stuff, don't they?
Yes, they do. So they do have a journey, even though it's not as deep or satisfying as Mendoza's. It's interesting how you spotted a bit of depth to Pedro. I hadn't noticed he was claustrophobic, and you did, and it is a consistent bit of characterization. He doesn't like all this crawling around in tunnels and getting trapped in caves and so on.
I don't like being closed in like this, he says. And Mendoza goes, "Don't be a coward." And I think, you can't say that to people with phobias nowadays.
Yes, that very much shows the attitudes of the times and the attitude of Mendoza. He's very brave and can do, like Eleanor the Chipmunk.
Yes.
And feels that other people should be. And that's something he admires in the young characters, the three children, that he thinks Sancho and Pedro should demonstrate more. And he perhaps, when he set off on the adventure looking for gold, wasn't expecting to feel that way about his companions. So that's a very definite part of his journey. So Sancho and Pedro certainly have their place in the show, and they have more value than I used to credit them with. So let's move on now to talking about the three main characters, the young characters, the children as they're often called, although that may not be the best term for them, as we'll come on saying in a minute, Esteban, Zia, and Tao. Now, you really have to like and enjoy Esteban, Zia, and Tao and their characters and their interplay and their journey if you're going to enjoy the Cities of Gold. And when I came to watching it on YouTube, I realised that and thought, I wonder if I am going to like and enjoy them, and if they have good interplay. I wonder if Zia has a bit of a ship with either of them. I wonder if I'll be interested.
Wow, how little you knew.
And good Lord, was I interested. Actually, yes, I was interested. Now, Esteban is the main character. He is introduced to us as an orphan who lives in Barcelona in Spain. You can't tell that he's actually, spoiler, half Incan probably, because he's white. But you do get to hear the story of how he was rescued from a storm at sea around South America by Mendoza 12 years earlier.
That's Mendoza acting out of pure altruisticness and doing something not for his own gain, isn't it?
Or is it? Is he rather interested in the richly decorated Inca ship that he sees sinking and wonders what he can get out of it if he goes to rescue the survivors?
Ah, there is that.
It's lovely ambiguity, isn't it? I mean, he does kind of plunge in when nobody else will and be brave and be a hero, but I wonder if always at the back of his mind that lust for gold and for information that will lead him to the Cities of Gold is prevalent or, always influencing his actions. And that's why he keeps the pop-out section of Esteban's medallion, very famous items from the show, the medallions of the sun, which Esteban has around his neck as a baby. Turns out it's been passed down through generations of Incas. And Mendoza keeps a part of it and does his investigations for the next 12 years about how to find the Cities of Gold. So there's always, or usually, some ambiguity to Mendoza, which is very nice and interesting. So Esteban's grown up in Barcelona. He's been raised by the dean of the cathedral, Father Rodriguez. And he has a lot of very good, admirable, noble qualities. Possibly some of them instilled in him by this priest. But I think, really, we're meant to take away that Esteban is naturally pure. And he represents what's good about humanity, about childhood innocence and purity, and he will bring that to any relationship he has with any other characters in the show, any situation in the show where things will start to get rough. Esteban will bring pure bravery, loyalty, hope and light, and really shine through as the kind of person, the kind of force for good that we should all hope to be. There's this bit where two of the antagonists from later in the series, the Doctor and Morenche, and their beefy companion, Tetiola, are trapped down the ravine, and they're begging for help from the protagonists, and everyone wants to go off and leave them. Well, I suppose Mendoza wants to go off and leave them, and Esteban's the only one who stands up against Mendoza and says, no, we have to help them. Now, in terms of the actual practicality of the situation, you should wander off and leave them, because they've been a terrible nuisance. They're trying to do all sorts of terrible things, and find the cities of gold, and steal Tao's magic jar, and just be general nuisances. But by saying, no, we have to help them, Esteban proves himself better than everyone there, better than the whole concept of the search for the cities of gold, better than the whole concept of people being at odds with each other for no real reason. So I always love to see the purity coming through there, and in other situations as well. Now, Esteban's voice in English is an interesting aspect of the character, because it's actually too young-sounding in practical terms. Now, he's supposed to be at least 12, as we find out in the first episode, but seeing as he was a baby, or with hair, not a newborn 12 years ago, and they've spent 5 months on a ship crossing the Pacific Ocean to get to South America, I do tend to think that Esteban is 13 for most of the series. And the young actor they employed in the Canadian production studio to play him was about 10 at the time. So really, he sounds a bit too young. And if you listen to the French dub, Esteban does sound more adolescent than childish. But, and here's the thing, it really, really works, the young voice, to bring out the purity and childish innocence of the character. Why don't you tell us what you think of Shiraz Adam, who voiced Esteban when he was so young?
I love Shiraz Adam. I enjoyed his interviews on the special feature on your DVD. As Esteban, when I first watched it, I thought, well, he sounds much too young, that's a bit stupid. But as you say, it's not a bit stupid, and I actually think it's a very charismatic and well-acted performance, and absolutely spot-on interpretation of the character. Being so young, he does sometimes mess up the inflections of the lines, and they explain on these interviews how they had to sit and look at the, what do they call it?
I can't remember what they call it. It's calligraphy.
Yeah, there's a script running in front of them with the words written all in different sizes and that kind of thing, and you have to say it just when it hits a red line.
Yeah.
Which is extremely difficult, and when they've explained that, then they cut in with a scene of Esteban going, "You're asking me to do the impossible. I'm just an ordinary boy like any other," which made me laugh. He doesn't do that ever so well, and the other actors reveal that he sometimes messed up and they had to start again, and they were there all day trying to do one line. But actually, as the series goes on, he gets a lot better at doing the inflections as well as the acting, but he always, throughout, puts the right mood and enthusiasm and characterization into the lines.
Yes, we really noticed how later on he was acting it much better and getting all the right emotion in, and of course inevitably that will happen. As you do something more and more, you get better at it. And in a way, it quite nicely reflects Esteban's journey, the fact that he's surer of what he's saying and how he's saying it later on. He's grown a lot as a person, and Shiraz has grown a lot as an actor. But of course the reason they have to do this, reading the calligraphy as it goes past the red line, is the script's been translated from French into English by a French woman who appears in many of the episodes in various roles.
She was French-Canadian, was she?
I think she's actually French.
Actually French?
Yes,
right,
working in Canada. The mouth movements that the characters are making have to match pretty much the speech that is coming out in English from the actor's mouth, which is not always easy to achieve. They say she understands the writings of the Incas, for example. And being so young and inexperienced at doing this, Shiraz didn't find it as easy as obviously the grown-up actors and the young actors playing Zia and Tao. Tao, as we'll come on to, Adrian Knight had a lot of experience of doing it before. So they did it with other shows such as Ulysses 31 that he was in. But I can see why in the blind choice of 4 actors that we're told about on the DVD, the voice selectors went for Shiraz as Esteban. And they probably sat and said, look, he sounds too young, but the absolute conviction and purity of his voice absolutely suits what we're going for with Esteban and what he's going to bring to the whole journey and the whole ensemble. So that's why it works really, really well. And I think a huge part of what's so appealing about the character is the voice performance, as is probably the case with all cartoon characters, really.
I do approve of that method of casting, actually. Complete anonymity. When you watch the interviews on the DVD, it turns out that none of those 3 characters are the same ethnicity as their actor.
Oh yes, which is very interesting. The voice was right, so that's what was chosen. Even though, yes, Tao and Esteban are the opposite colours in real life. And Zia's just a white, young Canadian girl, not at all anyone of Incan descent. And speaking of Zia, let's move on to her. She is the probably second most featured character, but you could say she's the least interesting of the 3 young people, children characters. She very much represents innocence and purity as well, but she's very much less capable than Esteban physically. But I suppose that just reflects how things would have been at the time. She does take on the damsel in distress role, and Esteban is very much her white knight, and some people might say that's a bit of an outdated relationship to give them, but I think it's very nice and very well done, because of course it's very pure and comes from a place of love and innocence and just wanting to do the right thing. So they both fall into those roles rather nicely. One thing Zia does represent is the oppressed and almost ousted Native American people who are kind of fighting against the conquistadors but kind of resigned to their fate. I always think that Zia is very much the microcosm of them, and the way that Esteban is with Zia and with other Native American people represents how we should all have been with them. Open, honest, kind, not aggressive like Governor Pizarro. Esteban exemplifies how we should go to another country and treat the people there even though it hasn't happened. So Esteban and Zia are both sort of microcosms of the new world for Zia and the old world for Esteban. And their relationship shows how things should have gone between people of different races, but didn't.
That is a very interesting bit of symbolism there. One thing I'm actually not crazy about in this series is Zia's feebleness, as it were. I've said on the Chipmunks podcast and the He-Man and She-Ra podcast how it's nice as a girl to see girls on the television being as capable as the boys. Nowadays they often sort of overcompensate, I think, and make female characters in these things sort of superhuman.
Yes, And they may have slightly done that with Zia, but we'll come back and talk about that at the very end.
I don't even know what you mean, so I'm looking forward to that. I think if they made the Cities of Gold right now, Zia would become this overly feisty, oppressed Incan, sort of kicking all the conquistadors in the face and stuff, and I wouldn't want to see that either.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because I get the impression that might be slightly what they've done with her in the sequel series.
Righto.
Not with Conquistadors, because it's all set in Asia, but I think they've taken her too far the other way. But we'll talk about that briefly at the end.
I'd rather that Zia was on more equal terms with Esteban. She relies on him much too much. If she falls off anything or anyone's coming to kidnap her, she'll suddenly start screaming for Esteban. And I think given that it was the 80s, she should be a bit further along than that. So I'm not crazy about that aspect of the show, but never mind, it's still a really great show and a very compelling relationship, and as I said, I do like that thing Jake says that they represent about how things should be between different nations.
Esteban does have that bit where he's about to topple off the wall, and Zia helps him, so she does get to repay the favour a little.
Just a little. There's also that bit, which is probably my favourite bit for Zia, where she's getting captured and stuff, and they want her to read the quipu, which is a piece of string with knots in with a message that the Incan people can read. And she absolutely refuses to betray the secrets of her people, and she runs away from them, and she climbs around on the ship's rigging and all that kind of thing.
Yes, she can be very feisty and strong when it's the deep core of her being that is being threatened.
She's got that absolute conviction that no matter what, she will not read the quipu, she will not tell the Spanish the secrets of her people. And I would have liked to see more of that. I would have liked to see her reacting against the oppression more often, but not in over-the-top ways.
Again, it's that purity and innocence and absolute conviction in doing the right thing that Esteban has, and they both bring it to the show in abundance in slightly different ways. Another aspect of Zia that I do like, and perhaps it does pigeonhole her too much as a girl, fulfilling a traditional female role, is when she starts mothering people who are in trouble. Usually the young native girls who are going to be sacrificed, or, well, mainly sacrificed, really. Zia will become very much the mother figure and look after them and assure them that everything's going to be all right, while Tao works out exactly what they're practically going to do, and Esteban carries stuff around and helps Tao. So Zia certainly has her role to play as a force for good and for purity and the right way to do things in the gang.
I think that's okay. I mean, there's stereotyping genders, and then there's deliberately avoiding traditional gender roles for no reason. But it's true that girls in that sort of situation would feel more comfortable being helped initially by another girl, so I think that's fine.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we might look back and say, oh, well, it's a bit gender-specific about a few of these things, but yeah, perhaps even for being made in the 80s, it is a bit too much in that direction, but it's supposed to be set in the 1630s, and having it any other way wouldn't be that realistic. Not that the show is probably all that realistic, with the flying golden condor and the thermonuclear war between Atlantis and Mu or Hiva, but I think to have the main characters grounded in a kind of reality we can identify with is a good idea.
Well, you know, it's not that women were feeble in the very olden days, the distant past. It's that the stories of what actually happened were written down, passed on by men and their interpretations of what went on. So, having a feistier Zia wouldn't be unrealistic, I should think.
You just wouldn't want to see her go too much the other way and become unrealistically feisty.
Superhuman.
Yeah. So now we'll move on to talk about the third member of the trio, Tao. Now you came up with a very good description for Tao when we were last watching it.
I said that he's the ultimate only child, and you were awfully impressed, weren't you?
I was. Tao has to really earn his place in the trio of the good, the pure, the light, the hope. Not really by anything bad he's done, but by the fact that he has grown up on the Galapagos Islands all by himself, and is rather selfish, self-centered, narrow-minded, a bit confrontational and snarky when they first meet him, which of course is quite understandable, isn't it? And all he's got to go on is this prophecy that says Zia's going to come and take him to the New World, South American continent, and there he's going to discover the great legacy of his ancestors, which is City of Gold, basically. And that's kind of his only goal in life at the beginning, when they meet him. But then as the show goes on, Tao has a tremendous journey. They all have a tremendous journey in which they grow physically, emotionally, mentally. But Tao perhaps has the most extreme journey because he learns from his experiences and from being around Esteban and Zia what is important. Friendship, loyalty, purity, the code of Thundera, basically. And I really do like to see that journey that Tao takes. And you do get to see it unfold very clearly on screen. You get the bit where he has to blow up his ship, which is one of the last treasures of his ancestors. And at first he's like, well, no, I can't possibly do it. It's much too important. But then Zia makes him realise, look, you're doing it for me, for Esteban, for all the Indians who we love so much. And once Tao's got over crying and complaining, he's like, oh yeah, that is more important actually, isn't it? And then he's still a little bit selfish and teasing and goading Esteban a bit too much about his fear of heights. But he moves on to another scene which I think is important, which is the water sharing scene.
Ah.
Where Esteban and Zia share their water with this giant. Sounds a bit stupid, doesn't it?
Yes.
Who was previously an enemy, but now is just a person in trouble, and Esteban is absolutely adamant that he needs to be helped, and Zia quite agrees and joins in, and Tao holds back. And then...
and Mendoza and Pedro and Sancho absolutely refuse to give him any water, don't they?
That's right, but that's one of the times when Mendoza is surprised by how impressed he is with the strong characters of the children, and how he thinks, well, I wish I had the mental fortitude to do that sort of thing, but I don't, so that's that.
Yes, it's like Shakespeare contrast between the different character reactions.
And Tao really earns the final bit of his purity, of his nobility there, by saying it was wrong of me to hold back, so now I'm going to share my water with Esteban and Zia because they've given up all those. And that scene where they're all sharing the water skin and smiling at each other really cements the friendship that they have, the dynamic they have now as a trio, and the fact that Tao has earned his place in it.
He's interesting because he goes through more of a change than the other two. The other two grow up and have these life-changing experiences, but they don't really change in the same way that Tao does, go from being the ultimate only child to being one of the group and a much more selfless, noble kind of person.
Excellent summary of what I've been trying to say for the past 5 minutes. And of course, Tao is extremely useful because he is very clever. He invents things, which in many cartoons is a bit of a cliche, where the character goes around inventing things. But with Tao, it works really well. I suppose it underlines his journey. He used to just study the old writings of his ancestors and invent things for himself. His ancestors had things like flying machines and bicycles and thermonuclear power and things, and he's adapted some of them into useful things on his own private island, like a lift and a crossbow. But he then moves on to using his great intelligence and great skills to help others, to create things to save the people of the lake from the giants, a submarine specifically.
Wow, he invents a submarine.
Yes, he does.
I forgot that.
Out of the 2 watertight reed boats, and it even has the periscope.
Ah, yes.
And he invents things like giant flares and exploding bombs and things that are going to be useful and help people against the antagonists.
So he doesn't invent a submarine from scratch. There are already the watertight boats, and he has the idea of fixing them together.
Yes, he takes what already exists and very much takes the next step, which is how science progresses, really.
And he doesn't invent sort of silly things for the sake of it, like the paint sprayer and the spaghetti bolognese blunderbuss. He makes things out of what's available that are useful and realistic.
But they do start to develop, the trio, a good kind of group dynamic there, where if you're in trouble, Zia will come and comfort you, Tao will come up with a brilliant plan to make it better, and Esteban will provide the determination never to give up on the plan and to keep fighting no matter what happens, and he will also do things like carry around all the heavy things, pull back the crossbow, work the flippers on the submarine, and just generally make sure things don't fall apart and that the plan has the best chance it can possibly have of succeeding, to make things as good as possible. I mean, I sometimes used to wonder if Esteban was really as useful as the other 2, but he is. He provides all the heart, all the spirit, all the oomph that is needed to achieve these things, as well as, of course, most of the righteousness and purity that's needed to get things off the ground. He's one of these leaders, as it were, who may not have all the actual practical skills, but who is vital as a linchpin to keep the team together, such as Hazel from Watership Down. As we mentioned, Tao was voiced by Adrian Knight.
It's a very polished, professional performance. When he's talking about it on the DVD, I mean, we don't know how he really feels, how much he really loves it. It seems more like he's talking about it as a job and one of many than when Shiraz talks about it.
His voice is a much older voice than Shiraz, and a much more assured performance. We noticed, didn't we, last time, how he noticeably broke his voice during the show.
But that's okay, because it's all about growing up, and at that point the Olmecs are bashing him against the side of the cliff, aren't they? Is that the Olmecs?
Yeah.
And they're saying, we're going to kill this young man. And
Yes.
I thought that was a very good way to describe him at that point in the show.
Yes, it does quite nicely fit in with Tao's journey, the break in his voice, which must have been a bit of an accident. But it does show how Adrian was a lot more grown up and experienced than Shiraz, and apparently Adrian was also going for the role of Esteban, and I don't think he would have brought the same purity and absolute conviction to the part that Shiraz did, so that was definitely the right choice to make.
They complement each other well. Adrian certainly deserves the place in the show. He's just not right for Esteban.
Yeah, they do complement each other well. Tao, sounding older and more assured in what he's saying, is in some ways an accident because the actor is older and has done the reading the calligraphy before, but it suits the characters. Tao is very sure of himself, being the ultimate only child, and his journey starts from there. So the voices are absolutely perfect to complement the characters, the relationships between them, and the journey they go on.
And his magic jar does make us laugh, doesn't it? Because when they first meet him, he just says quite quickly, oh, look, I've got this jar. And then I forgot all about it. Probably you did when you were 6 first watching it. And then about 9 episodes later, he suddenly turns around and says, oh, I've left my magic jar on the condor. And
Yes.
I'm like, magic jar? He didn't even call it magic the first time he showed it to us.
That's one of the many kind of mistranslations in it. They've put magic in. They wanted something like mysterious.
And then there's the fact that you actually haven't heard about it for weeks and weeks.
Yes. So it does have a few little funny bits that make you think, translations, how funny they come out sometimes.
What's the anaconda going to do to them?
The anaconda is going to eat us all up, as Mendoza says. Terribly funny. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't translate that well, but it's always brilliant because it always comes from the right place, and the actors do such a good job with it. Perhaps we should just briefly mention the antagonists now. There's a kind of relay of antagonists throughout the epic adventure, and they all kind of come back together at the end. First, you get basically the Spaniards, the conquistadors, the main characters of which are Commander Gomez, who works very closely under General Pizarro, who very much one of the early conquistadors from real life, and Captain Gaspar, who is in charge of the Spanish army, so he should probably be called General Gaspar, really.
I got very confused. I was like, so who's the captain of the ship then? There's two captains.
Yes, there's Captain Perez on the ship, who's the ship's captain, and Captain Gaspar, who's the army captain.
Gaspar was making me laugh, wasn't he? He just hates Mendoza for no reason, and he sort of goes around chuckling to himself about what he'd like to do to Mendoza.
I had my hands around Mendoza's throat or something. And whatever's going on, like the ship's sinking, everyone's drowning, and he's saying, Mendoza, let's finish our fight now.
Yeah, and I decided, didn't I, that he was the ancestor of Eduardo from Extreme Ghostbusters.
And why not indeed? Why shouldn't he be?
Well, he's got his nose, and he's also quite similar in build and temperament to Eduardo's brother Carlos, so I decided when we last watched it that he was going to be their ancestor.
And he ends up hanging around South America, having been sort of ousted from the army at the end. So why not settle down and start a family? But I do like Gomez and Gaspar as antagonists, as characters. They're definitely my favourite antagonists, I think. There are other Spaniards as well who they interact with at times, and the Spaniard section is overall, I think, the peak of the show. But Gomez and Gaspar, they are very greedy for gold. They are very bad to the natives. They will pay for the insolence of that damn Inca. Strong, very strong stuff there.
Racism.
But they're a good representation of what things would have been like at the time. And, I don't know, they do develop a kind of nice duo kind of friendship between them when they've only got each other left in the world and can't really go back to Governor Pizarro anymore. So I do like them as characters and as antagonists. We then kind of immediately move on to the Doctor, Marinche, and Tetiola, who I mentioned earlier. Now, Marinche is a Mayan, and she's a kind of traitor from within. She's kind of the polar opposite of Zia in that way. The Doctor is a greedy European who's very like the Conquistador. Tetiola, well, he's a Mayan as well, but he just kind of follows Marinche and does what she does. And, I mean, I don't mind them as antagonists. And they're quite important for facilitating the continuation of the plot, because they're fighting to find these manuscripts that lead the way to the City of Gold, and there's got to be some kind of obstacle for our gang when they're trying to find them. So I don't really object to those, but I don't like the final kind of group of antagonists, which is the Olmecs. They're kind of ugly and weird looking, and we do stray a bit too far there, I think, into the realms of sci-fi. And they want to shift the axis of the Earth, and there's kind of implications that they might be aliens or sent from aliens, and their base looks very like a spaceship. It just gets a bit too sci-fi, and at the end, everyone's hanging around with the Mayas, the main group's hanging around with the Mayas. They're not having their epic journey anymore, they're kind of staying in one place and having various skirmishes with the Olmecs. That's a bit of a low dip at the end of the series for me.
I've seen the Olmecs twice, because I've watched it all the way through twice, including quite recently, and the second time, the Olmecs were more interesting than I was expecting them to be after the first time. It's quite interesting what they're trying to do, trying to live forever because they've been made sterile by some sort of radiation, haven't they?
Radiation from this thermonuclear war between Atlantis and Heva, and it's all part of the big backstory of the show.
And the Heva people are Tao's ancestors, which we may not have explicitly said, so that's bringing things sort of full circle, I suppose.
Yes, It's supposed to be full circle in that Tau and indeed Zia represent the Heaver side of the old conflict, and the Olmecs represent the Atlantis side of the old conflict. But actually, in the original French, they kind of got that wrong, and the Olmecs say that they too are descended from the Heaver Empire. There's a couple of little details that the French didn't get quite right that I think the Japanese company wanted to sneak in, but that doesn't spoil the show.
No, and the Olmec story arc does have that really brilliant scene where they're flying around in their giant vacuum cleaner, and Esteban and Zia need to escape.
Oh, you like that scene? I always like that scene.
Oh, it's fantastic. I think Shiraz in particular really comes into his own with his acting there. He puts absolutely everything into Esteban's determination to escape when everything seems hopeless.
And to pick up Zia on the way. That's very much a culmination, in many ways, of Esteban's journey. He will come through, use his absolute determination and a feat of great physical strength at the end to really surprise the Olmecs and gain that kind of mini victory that leads on to the final stage of the story. Yes, I always really thought that was a highlight of the series, that scene, so it certainly has its moments, the Olmec arc. And it is quite interesting, some of the moral questions about the Olmecs. Are they really bad, as Zia's father says on his deathbed? What do they want? Just what we all want, really, to live, to survive. They don't go about it in a very nice or amenable way, but it would be wrong to say, I think, that any character in the show, be it protagonist or antagonist, is completely good or bad. Well, apart from Esteban and Zia, obviously. So at least that remains consistent all the way through. I've made a note that the next thing I want to say is what makes the show so great. It's the fantastic mix of sci-fi, real history, epic adventure, a coming-of-age story for the three main protagonists, which we do want to go into more detail about. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet, the score of the show, the background music, which absolutely matches the emotions that are coming through perfectly. And of course it's the original score from the French dub. It works with French soundtrack and it works with the English soundtrack.
You were talking about the death of Zia's father. That scene, the music, the animation, the acting, it all comes together to make an extremely well done, very moving scene. And the background's the sort of time of day. It's kind of sunset, isn't it? And everyone goes and sits around on this sort of mountain, and there's this sad music playing. It's the melody of the theme song, sort of fluty and slowed down. And Esteban with the tears in his eyes, and the sun going down, and the red sky. It's just all incredibly atmospheric, and I always remember that scene.
And it's quite understated as well. That's why it works so effectively. It reaches something deep inside you and taps into that emotion like just pure words or pure music or pure pictures never could, but they all combine so well. It's quite important for Mendoza, that scene, isn't it?
What's happened is that they've all quietly walked out of the room and left Zia to her grief, haven't they?
Yes.
And then Mendoza starts saying, let's go and find some more clues to the cities of gold then, shall we? And Esteban saying, how can you think about it? What about Zia's sadness, he says.
And Tao is the one who actually points out Mendoza's very sad too, but he's had a journey and doesn't really want us to see it. And I think that very much underlines Tao's journey as well.
He's become very sensitive and perceptive, and he would understand perhaps better than Esteban not being able to express your emotions in those kinds of ways.
Yes, that's absolutely it. It's a very powerful sequence, that, and that's after the Olmecs have come in, so don't stop watching it when you first see an Olmec.
No way. There's a sort of something exciting is happening melody as well, isn't there, which is a very good one.
There's all sorts, and there's Esteban's theme and Tao's theme, and they're all just woven in so well. And it's interesting, the first time we watched it properly, I said to you, oh, wasn't the score good? And you said something like, well, I didn't really notice it. And that shows how good it is, because what it does is just evoke the correct feelings at the correct time. And like good directing, you don't notice specifically that it's happening.
And ball boys and ball girls at tennis, if they're really, really good, then the players don't notice them.
I'll just come back to that scene you were talking about briefly. You were saying about Esteban and his tears, and I do love those sequences, and it happens again when Zir's kneeling at the grave, and Esteban has these wobbling eyes, and he's looking at her like that. It's a very powerful bit of animation. Did you want to say something about the condor, which is part of the sci-fi element of the show?
It's such a huge part of the show, I think it's worth mentioning. And if you read comments on the internet from people who don't remember it that well but know that they liked it, they'll always say, I do remember them flying around in a massive golden bird.
Yes, I always remember that, of course, from when I was 6, and because it is very striking. It's certainly something you won't see on any other show. No matter how many giant airships or whatever they have for the characters to fly about in, there won't be a massive gold solar-powered condor.
Solar power and sun is a great theme throughout, and of course, which we haven't mentioned, Esteban is the child of the sun.
Oh, yes.
And the people of Barcelona believe that he can make the sun come out, and if you believe that, then that's the most fantasy that the show gets rather than sci-fi. But then, of course, it could just be a coincidence. The sun always comes out when Esteban wants it to.
They are deliberately ambiguous with that. But yes, the sun is so important a symbol in the show, and they show it as having the power to help the human race and the power to destroy the human race. As I mentioned, the thermonuclear war of the past, which is how we lost Atlantis in this continuity. And the choice of whether the sun is going to shine on the human race or not comes down to our main characters. Once they've had their epic journey and kind of finished in a more pure way the war that was started so long ago, so they can come together after all those centuries and make the right decision. We've been talking about symbolism, so let's now go on to the coming-of-age symbolism, which is quite prevalent in the show. I'm sure it's not surprising to anyone to learn that the 3 main young characters would have a life-changing journey during the course of the show, but something that you probably wouldn't see in a more Western animation is the reflection of the mental and emotional journey they're doing in the physicality of the actual characters. Now, in our society, we do tend to have this taboo, don't we, about representing children characters in a way that could be construed as remotely sexual. Because, of course, quite rightly, we're very concerned with child protection. Yes, as we should be. But one thing that the Japanese animators, I think it's fair to say, have always been unafraid to do is to use, artistically, the adolescent human form, male and female, to reflect physically emotional changes in the characters that are happening on screen. And this is something they do very much in The City of Gold, isn't it?
Yes, you can't really see it with Tao because he's got a great big yellow poncho on.
Yes.
And also he's not going through a sort of romantic journey, love story sort of thing like Esteban and Zir. The 2 of them, anyway, you see them start to grow physically. And they're at that sort of age, as you said. Esteban has got to be 13 most of the time. So you are physically getting sort of bigger and older and more mature.
Yes, I always noticed it with Esteban. He's very young boy looking at the beginning. And then once he's gone through all these experiences and started doing things like climbing mountains and carrying heavy objects and fighting the golden condor, you see that they start drawing him with these huge muscles, particularly in his arms and also chest, and you think, well, what are they trying to say there? And of course they're trying to say Esteban has grown. He is now stronger. And as you can see, he's physically grown and physically stronger. The same is true inside. Now, in this way, they're not really trying to sexualize him as such. They're just making a point about the journey that the character's going on, and they're using his physicality to show that. And they're not afraid to do that, even though he is a young character, an adolescent character. And I actually think, as an artistic way of demonstrating this, it's a very good and effective way of doing so, and I don't think we should shy away from it so much or feel some kind of taboo about it. And I wasn't really sure that they were doing it with Zia so much, but we really did notice this time. She does look a lot more physically mature by the end, doesn't she?
A little more curvaceous.
Yes, curvaceous. We were discussing, I think, how this physicality was noticeable in both Esteban and Zia towards the end, and I said in both of them, look at their chests. They're both larger now, to show that they're larger inside as well as in the pectoral regions, for various reasons. And the fact that it is Esteban and Zia that have gone through all this huge change is very significant, because they're the ones with the medallions of the sun. They're the ones who are supposed to make the decisions whether or not to open the Cities of Gold gate at the end and use the great sun power unit inside for good or evil. And they've been through this epic journey growing up along the way in order to be equipped to make this decision. And this is one of the kind of mistranslations or mistakes that the French kind of made with their original script. And this one always kind of rankled with me and didn't seem quite right. The high priest at the end says, the Emperor of Hiva, who had the Cities of Gold built and set up this whole epic quest from so many centuries ago, decided that the choice would be left in innocent hands, the hands of children. And I thought, oh, that's not quite right, is it? What he decided is that it would be left in the hands of two young adolescent people who had gone through a huge journey and were thus equipped to make that decision, not because they were innocent, but because they'd had the right growing experiences to be in the right position to make the correct decision. So that is kind of a bit of a mistranslation, or a misconception from the original Japanese, I suppose, and it kind of undermines what the journey is supposed to be leading to and what the priest is trying to say at the end.
Leaving it in innocent hands would be a bit of a cheat, wouldn't it? Because they would be sure to do the right thing, not really through any choice of their own.
That's right. And they decide to kind of let the Olmecs get access to the power in order to save Tau. And so they've kind of not made the innocent decision there. They've decided that things like friendship and loyalty and other noble aspects that are in the Code of Thundera, as I say, are more important than what happens to the thermonuclear power unit. So again, Esteban and Zia prove that they are better than the whole concept of the whole show. We'll come back to the point about physicality reflecting emotional development in Japanese animation.
Maybe soon.
Maybe soon.
Maybe very soon.
And I think it is an interesting point and one that's really worth thinking about. I think there's a big difference between using an adolescent human form artistically and sexually. And I think it's a shame that the lines have become so blurred in our kind of Western society that we can't really see the difference anymore. So that's why I take no shame from saying, yes, I think it is a very effective way of demonstrating their emotional journey. They do physically change to match it.
Of course, Tau's voice breaks, but that's kind of an accident.
Yes,
completely an accident, in fact.
It's an accident. It's worked out quite well.
happy accident.
We haven't given you details there of all the epic events and all the exciting things that happen and all the symbolism in the show.
That would take weeks.
It would take absolutely weeks, but hopefully we've given you a good taster there, a good idea of the kind of extraordinary depth that this cartoon show has. As I say, when I watched it on YouTube, I was absolutely flummoxed that an old cartoon could actually bore that deep into the kind of essence of humanity. I think that if the human soul or magic exists, it probably is created perhaps in pieces of art like this.
Speaking of boring, obviously I didn't get that the first time I tried to watch it. The first time I managed to watch it all the way through, I thought, oh yeah, this is good. And then the second time, which was the recent time, I enjoyed it more. I don't know what it'll be like if I watch it through a third time.
Maybe you'll like it even more next time.
Maybe I will. But I said at the time, I don't think it speaks to me as much as it speaks to you, and I think your initial reaction was to be slightly horrified. And I said, well, it does speak to me, but it obviously speaks to you more. And I think the only thing that's really missing is that you remember watching it as a 6-year-old, and I only gave it a go when I was in my, what was I, late teens, early 20s?
Yes, that's right. A lot of our humanity, our soul, if it's created as we grow, comes from our very young years, I'm sure. So that's why Mysterious Cities of Gold is very firmly in mine. Now, there was talk for many years of whether there was or wasn't going to be some sort of sequel series. And I think, chiefly thanks to the great success of the official DVD release, the decision was made to commission 3 further series. But so much time has passed.
3?
And yes, apparently they're making 2 more. There's one in existence already.
Whoa.
I don't know if they're actually doing that. But so much time has passed, and it was in the hands of a completely different production company, all in France this time. No lovely symbolism from the Japanese, it should be noted, that it's really not the same thing at all. It's kind of one interpretation of a sequel, but it may not stack up very well in the eyes of all fans, and from what I've seen, I think it falls short in a lot of ways.
I think really they could have never made a decent sequel. These epic cartoons, of which we will talk about a couple more on these podcasts, they're so well done, and they do everything so well, they can never be replicated or equalled. Even with a sequel in the same sort of vein, they couldn't recapture it. That's what I think.
Yes, I think that's very true. These things are so special and such journeys in and of themselves that doing a sequel to them, it's never going to live up to the original and probably isn't even really going to be worth doing. The problem I have with the new season of The Mysterious Cities of Gold, from what I've seen of it, I haven't seen any whole episodes, I've seen bits and bobs that I've found on the internet, is that it doesn't really understand everything we've been saying about the original series. Every time I see something about it that I think, oh, well, that's quite good, I then read or see something else and I think, oh, they haven't got it at all, actually. My specific examples are that there's the scene where Esteban is climbing the wall of the prison. They all look completely ugly in it, by the way. It's not because they're chiefly computer animated or everything. They've just made them look like crap.
They're very stylised, aren't they?
Very stylised. And when everyone would read about it before it was coming out, it was all like, oh yes, it'll be true to the style of the original. It's really not. The Condor looks terrible as well. Then it's not just because it's different, it's because It's, as you say, too stylized and rather ugly. But Esteban's climbing this wall anyway, and his fear of heights is overcoming him, and Zia and Tao are encouraging him, and he goes to the top, and you think that's quite a nice bit of demonstration of the friendship and the group dynamic. And you think, but really, Esteban's kind of had his journey with his fear of heights, and should be at the end of it, and they're kind of retreading old ground that they don't need to tread.
He jumped out of the aeroplane. You wouldn't do that if you still had your fear of heights.
Exactly, so, climbing up a wall isn't going to make him brick it as much as it does in that. The other trouble with Esteban is that in the first sort of arc of the second, I don't want to call it the second series, the sequel series, he starts throwing a hissy fit and being all upset about the fact that the journey to find his father possibly didn't work out the way he expected. And in the original series, it kind of seems like Mendoza's kept the truth from him to protect him, but as you were pointing out to me last time, Esteban works it out himself and knows full well who his father is and why he's doing what he's doing, and comes to terms with it in his own mind at the end of his epic journey, and that's kind of the end of his journey. And then to have Esteban come back in the next one and start going, oh, c'est mon père, and rushing off and crying and going back to the monastery and saying, oh, je suis désolé. It just kind of nullifies the end of the journey he's already had in the first series, which I think is very disappointing.
And of course that's the woman saying that, isn't it? Not a child.
Oh, the voices! Esteban and Tao just sound like women. They don't even sound like young boys being done by women. Which, again, kind of is at odds with the journey they've already had, this time reflected in their physical selves.
And it does jar when you've heard Howard explaining why he was so adamant that actual children should do the voices in the original.
Doesn't he explain that well?
He says, if you get an adult to do it, he says adult, I say adult, no matter how good the adult is, they will always say it like an adult. And that sums it up brilliantly. I was saying that Esteban often gets his inflections wrong. For instance, he always emphasises this, or he tends to emphasise pronouns when he shouldn't. When they built this ship, when he should just say, when they built this ship.
And he still does it when he's in his 30s, when they recreate that scene. Oh.
That's true. An adult wouldn't do that, but it's worth that little error to get that childlike innocence into the line.
As Howard says, it sounds right, even if it's completely not how you'd expect it to be said, or how it might probably be said in real life, even by a child. It can't sound wrong in that voice and in that register.
And they actually show probably the best example of that, don't they? Where he's supposed to say, what's that? A foreigner? And he goes, what's that? A foreigner?
Yes.
But he's right. It sounds right.
Exactly. Some of the lines that Esteban has about this feels so strange, I've never been here, that I feel as if I've seen all this before. Perhaps they're not really very childlike lines in and of themselves, young person-like lines. But by putting in Shiraz with his absolute conviction and purity of speech, they become right.
Lovely Shiraz. And what's the name of the girl who's Zia? Because we haven't even mentioned it, have we?
Yes, Janice. Janice Chakelson, I think.
Janice, in her interview, tells us the first line that she had to say, or the line that she had to say for the audition, and they play it alongside Zia saying the line originally, and it sounds completely different.
Oh yes, it's too forced when she's an adult, isn't it?
And she says it like an adult.
It doesn't have the childish innocence anymore. And Tao, Adrian Knight's the worst, isn't he? He can't get Tao into his recreation at all.
Poor Adrian Knight.
Because he's too much of a consummate professional actor. I'll tell you about another scene that I know from or another aspect that I know from the sequel series that annoyed me. One of the main points in the original series is where we learn the in-universe reason that Machu Picchu lay undiscovered, hidden in the Andes for hundreds of years until 1911, which happened in real life. And who's to say that the reason isn't what it is in the Mysterious Cities of Gold, which is that Esteban and the gang manage to drive away the conquistadors from Machu Picchu using the Golden Condor, and it's never discovered again. And the Incas live there happily and peacefully, undisturbed, quietly, without being disturbed, for many, many more generations. The Incas believe that Esteban is the god with the white skin who will save them, and because of his complete purity and innocence, he hates to think that they think that he is better than them in some way, and he's always saying, oh no, please, no, don't say I'm a god, I'm just like you, we're all the same. But really, by saving the Incas, or the ones who live at Machu Picchu, which is quite a lot of them in the end, most of their Inca friends, Esteban is the god who saves them in the end, and the prophecy does come to pass.
You know, nowadays, if they made a cartoon, or maybe more like 10 or 20 years ago, if they made a cartoon where the three protagonists were a black person, a white person, and a Native American, everyone would go, oh, it's so PC, they're trying to be too PC. But this show is actually about being from different cultures and different lands, so no one says that.
And it's all terribly symbolic about their ethnicities and how they interact with each other because of their differences or in spite of their differences, and what that represents for the wider world. Of course, Esteban would argue there are no differences really, and in many ways he's right. But the problem I have with the sequel series anyway is that one of the characters who is supposed to be trapped, or not really the right word for it, is it, living peacefully cut off in Machu Picchu, appears in the new series being hounded and abused by the main sort of antagonist they're introducing. He's called Mayuca. He's the old wise priest and storyteller from Machu Picchu. And I think, well, if he's there, being in the continuing story, they haven't got the significance of the whole Machu Picchu arc in the original series. It's so important. It's meant to match up with kind of the real world. It lay undiscovered until 1911. And it's the whole symbolism, the whole payoff of the first Spanish/Inca arc. And that's really annoying, isn't it? They've come back to make a sequel and they haven't understood the original.
Doesn't he stand there saying, we can't get out, but no one can get in?
Yes, Chief Cracker. He very much sums it up at the end there.
A different character, but yes, I got it from him saying that, even though I don't know that much about Machu Picchu. I got that was what they were going for.
So that was terribly annoying. And as we said earlier, I reckon they've taken Zia too far in the direction of being too independent. They just needed to scale down a bit on her feebleness, really.
They've done exactly the same thing with Tintin and Thunderbirds, actually, haven't they?
They have. One scene I managed to find on the internet that I watched involved Esteban and Zia kind of coming together after an intense experience and kind of saying to each other, well, not explicitly, but well, we're in love, aren't we? And then Esteban gives Zia a nice little kiss. And I think, that shows that the makers of this sequel have at least understood their relationship and are perhaps taking it in the right direction. I might like to see that one day. But then I read that Zia goes all goo-goo over the Prince of Nepal or something, and Esteban and Tao both get jealous about it. I mean, that's a complete misunderstanding of all three characters and the relationship between them.
Yeah, what's Tao getting jealous for?
Exactly, he's got Maina, or has he?
He did get jealous of Esteban when he turned up to save Zia from Tao, but he didn't know them yet.
That's right. You, as I was saying earlier, you can't really blame Tao for what he's like at the beginning, because he's been on his own so long and he's all acting on this prophecy. He does kind of try to force his way between Esteban and Zia, but it's not really his fault, and it doesn't really work, and he soon realises it's not the right thing to do, and it's all part of his journey. And poor old Tao, he does end up getting rather excluded at times in the end, doesn't he? Like when he wants their help getting off the rock, and they're just running off hand in hand, and he's like, oh, no one's going to help me.
Oh.
And then Wayner and Ketcher, the two Incas, help him instead. So, I always thought Tao should get his Mayan girl, Maina, at some point, who's actually engaged to someone who's much too old for her. So I always like to imagine that they'll go back and nick her one day. And that's what I would put in my sequel. But the fact that it's not in the existing sequel, I'm not saying that's a bad thing about it. But it's something that I think did deserve to be revisited at some point. Maybe in the 2 subsequent series they're planning to make, they will revisit Tao and Maina. But I doubt it, because they don't seem to have understood much about what makes the original show so appealing, and when a payoff happens, that should be it. Otherwise you're kind of undermining the journey that everyone's been on. So maybe one day I'll be able to sit and watch the sequel properly and make a proper judgment about it. But until then, I just kind of think of it as an attempt to follow up the series that's undoubtedly rather redundant and doesn't really come from the right place, isn't made for the right reasons, probably just as trying to sell more DVDs, and something that shouldn't really be happening. I quite like the opening credits for it, where they seem to have got the trio relationship right. Esteban's standing there and Tao comes in and sort of ruffles his hair, and Zia comes in and grasps onto his strong muscular arm, and I think, yes, that's the sort of relationship they both have with him. But then they don't seem to have actually understood it in the proper show. So again, that's, I think, oh yes, perhaps it's okay, and then actually, I don't think once you get right down to it, it is okay. So if I do ever watch that, perhaps I'll change my views on it, but I'm not holding out much hope. And I think that will bring our Mysterious Cities of Gold podcast to an end. Not a premature end, I'm sure, because it's quite long. So, my feelings about Mysterious Cities of Gold are, as you can tell, it's an extremely good show. It's probably my second favourite show after Nightmare, but I went with He-Man first because that's one I'm probably fonder of from my childhood and I remember so well. But the Mysterious Cities of Gold, for quality, I don't think really can be beaten. And I always will have fond memories of watching it when I was young, and rediscovering it when I was older, and perhaps discovering my own soul along the way. And I think Rosie quite likes it too.
Yes, I think that it's an excellent feat of art and literature. I like it quite a lot, just not with the added aspect of having discovered it as a child. Next time, we're going to be talking not about my second or third favourite show. I'm going to put that on the back burner, because we're going to talk about something that follows on very nicely from this podcast. Only just in the old days, Digimon.
Perhaps not what you were expecting next if you were scanning old lists of 80s TV programmes, but yes, Digimon's next. So do join us again for that. And until then, there's nothing left to say except good night out there.
Whatever you